welcome to Lawyers on the Line. I am Stephanie Balmer, a partner with the Falsani, Balmer, Peterson, and Balmer law firm, and this evening's moderator. Tonight's topic is women in the law. Women were first admitted to the American Bar Association in 1918. As of January 2019, women made up only 38% of the legal profession. What factors impact the extent to which women achieve success in the legal profession? And what are our obligations as a society to remove barriers to women doing so? Tonight's panel consists of Clarissa Eck, Child Support Magistrate for the 6th Judicial District, and Kimberly Maki, Attorney and Head of the Civil Division of the St. Louis County Attorney's Office. Clarissa and Kim will respond to your questions about women in the law. Please call us with your questions at 218-788-2844 or 1-877-307-8762. And now let's begin. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very excited for the audience. Kim and Clarissa and I have been practicing in the Duluth community for many years. And so I'm real honored that both of you were here to join me tonight. I'm proud of us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Stuck around. So actually, let's start with this. Can you both give kind of a basic summary of what you're doing in your jobs and your history in the legal practice? Kim, do you want to start?
Sure. I graduated from law school in 2001. I practiced in Portland, Oregon for 3 years before moving back to Minnesota, where I grew up. When I was here, I worked in private practice for about 11 years before going to the county attorney's office in 2011. And I worked as a staff attorney for a year, and then after a year I was appointed as the civil division head, and I've been supervising the civil division ever since that time.
Okay. Clarissa, what about you?
So I am from the Duluth area, graduated from UMD, and then I went to law school at William Mitchell, now Hamlin Mitchell, and I graduated in 2005, came back to the Duluth area and worked for a private law firm doing primarily family law for the first year. And then I moved to the public sector and worked for the Indian Legal law firm, which is a nonprofit that helps Indigenous people in our area, low-income families. And I did primarily family law, so custody actions, child support. I then went to the county attorney's office and worked in the areas of child support in the public health and human services division. And then I did primarily child protection for the last 7 years. I was there for 10 years before accepting a position as a child support magistrate for the 6th Judicial District just last August.
Okay. And we all have families, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Just to give a little context. Well, let's start with kind of a general question. Kim, why do you think it's important for us to have a conversation about women in the law?
Well, I think that where we are in today's society, we need to be more representative, or the legal profession needs to be more representative of the clientele that it serves. So you look out there and, you know, the population is 50-50, but the people serving in the legal profession are not. You know, it's not 50% women, 50% men in most situations. And so I think it's important. Representation matters. And so it's important to have women in the legal profession and in leadership roles within the legal profession.
Claire, can you think of any other reasons why it's important for people to be aware of gender equality in the law?
Well, I think that it's everywhere. It involves every part of anybody's life, whether you're a man or a woman. Every woman has male partners, and male partners or males have women partners or mothers or sisters or daughters. And so it's everyone's issue.
Yeah.
It's not just women's issue. It's everybody's. And so the more we are equally represented, the better it will improve everyone's relationships, relationships with each other, but then also within the community, a feeling of fairness in every aspect. And the law coincides with fairness, or people's sense of fairness. And you want to see an equal representation of all sides, and especially in the legal community, because people are coming to the legal profession for help with any given situation. And it helps all sides when everyone's represented.
Okay, that makes sense. And we had a conversation before we came on the show about our legal community, primarily the Duluth area and surrounding communities. I think we all kind of agreed that there is an underrepresentation of women in our legal community. Do we have any solutions, any ideas about how we can fix that, either of you?
Well, I think that we have to look at our hiring practices and look at barriers that might be present in our offices to see what we can do, what we can change to make hiring women, or minorities for that matter, something that's easier and more, that we become more capable of doing it. Some of it is flexibility. As you mentioned, we both have families and rigid schedules and long hours and stuff like that often is a deterrent for women to take jobs in law firms or in the public sector, and so they bow out after a certain number of years or when they have kids or something like that. So just keeping an eye on those barriers that might be there and taking actions to remove those barriers so that it can be a more diverse workforce.
Clarissa, what are some things that you've observed either with other women lawyers or in your own practice that have made it work, made it possible for you to still be here changing people's lives?
I think that, as Kim stated, flexibility is huge, and I think we're moving in the right direction. I think change is happening, but it might not be happening as fast as it could be, and especially I think in our local legal community, which has primarily been dominated by male partners, who maybe had more traditional households, so they were able to work the long hours and prepare for trial on nights and weekends, and had a partner or support at home that could kind of step up within the home dynamic. And we're not seeing those traditional roles anymore. Very often, both parents are working full time. We are seeing definitely a change, and for the better, of more equal parenting time between both mothers and fathers. It's not traditional mother stays home, mother's the caretaker. The law and the legislature are making changes within the law to presume that it is in the best interests of a child that both mothers and fathers share equal time. And so we're moving away from that traditional role of mothers as caretakers, both in the workforce and within the law, just caretaking for children in general. And so I think that the employers need to catch up with that movement and recognize that this is a whole family issue and that needs to have flexibility for men and women, because it's both of them now taking the children to soccer practice and baseball practice and sharing that role, and you really need to have that flexibility. So I couldn't agree more that, and it's changing and it's getting better, but it could probably be done a little bit faster, I think.
And we talked a little bit too about, when I started practicing, I didn't even think to talk about maternity leave down the road. Are there any best practices that we're seeing with women in the law as far as expecting or negotiating benefits or anything like that? I mean, would you give any advice to a new female lawyer entering the workforce?
It's kind of funny. I would hesitate to say go for it, because I do think that if you started a negotiation for maternity leave that might happen at some point in the future when you're trying to get a job, that might be a check against you. So I wouldn't suggest doing it right off the bat, but when it becomes a reality or might become a reality, I do think it's good to have those conversations early and to make sure that the employers notice that you are, considering starting a family and that you'd like to have that discussion, and communication's key. There may be some attitudes or things that you'll have to deal with along the way that aren't great, but that's just part of negotiation. You have to get out there and ask for what you want, and have the discussion, have the dialogue.
Well, and here's an area where there is a difference, where clearly, right now anyway, it is only the female that can bear the child. Employers and other sectors are looking at paternity leaves, and that's wonderful. But right now, anyway, biologically, it's only the woman that carries the child, and because of that, then there is increased need for sick times, for appointments, even just leading up to the birth. And then obviously some recovery time. And so I do think that I agree with Kim that it is a very touchy area, because you don't want to go into a position identifying yourself as somebody who might need to have extra time, but then it is the reality. And so maybe becoming aware of just their general practices and policies regarding leaves, just as general questions to kind of get a sense, if you're thinking of starting a family in the future, whether that particular employer is showing some flexibility in that area. If there is some paid time, some places are now offering paid maternity leave, which is great. Maybe asking about different flexible options, working from home, or reducing part-time for a short amount of time. Just kind of those flexible options, and just maybe feeling out what's on the table. And if you think that it's an employer that you can work with in the future and that you feel comfortable, if you take the position that you think that they're going to be able to work with you.
And we, have friends in the community who have tried some of these options, and some of them are still working, and some of them have gone on to other careers and other paths. Is there anything, no regrets, but is there anything that you wish you would have known, or you wish you would have handled differently, or resources you would have tapped? It's a big question.
I don't. Given the situation that I was in at the time, I think that my employers were fair, especially the county. I was hired and then a week later announced that I would be having a baby in 3 months, and they were very gracious, and so I appreciate that, and it was a good thing. It was very helpful, and that was a great situation. And the time before, I had the dialogue with my employers, and we came to an agreement, and it worked out well.
I also worked for the county or in the public sector when I had my children, and they were also very gracious, very flexible. They had very good leave time packages, and so I didn't have that experience. But I will say that a good colleague of mine and personal friend was a partner at a firm in 2009, so we're talking 10 years ago, and that firm literally didn't have a maternity leave policy at all. She was the very first attorney that was having a baby in 2009, and they didn't really know how to deal with it, and she had to really negotiate that leave, and I think it was very difficult. Luckily for her, she was already in a partner position, and I think that provided some leverage. I don't know how different that would have or could have been, and maybe not at all if she had been associate. But it is amazing to me that in this day and age that women are still dealing with what I would see as those basic issues. So that was surprising, and so it's still out there. It is still something that needs to be negotiated and talked about.
We've talked a little bit about relationships and conversations with employers. What are some other entities that we're aware of in our day-to-day practice where our gender can sometimes feel like an issue? We've all tried cases in courts, and we're appearing before judges, or we are a judge. And can we talk a little bit about other entities? Kim, do you want to go?
Sure. I've been lucky. I haven't experienced any gender discrimination or anything like that in my practice with judges or with partners or with coworkers. Where I have had some of those issues is with clients or with people that I deal with when I'm just doing my work. And you handle each situation differently. Usually I just smirk and continue on dealing with what I'm dealing with, but that's where I've perceived it. But I've been very lucky that in the legal field I haven't had to deal with it.
I'd have to agree. Within the legal field and within the context of dealing with other lawyers and professionals in the legal field, as a practicing attorney or even as a magistrate, I haven't felt that. But I did recently attend a court mediation, a legal mediation with a family member, and where an older attorney was handling the mediation, and he kind of was going over the terms of the offer to us, and we were speaking to each other. It was my sister and I, and then kind of patted us and told us that my sister really should talk to her husband about that, and maybe her husband could call when he was able to let him know if they were accepting the offer or not.
Wow.
So it exists out there.
Wow.
It was surprising. It was surprising, and so I was taken aback by that because he wasn't aware of what I did as a profession. I didn't introduce myself into that context as a lawyer, but it definitely still exists.
I would just say that it shouldn't matter that, you know, you are a professional, magistrate. He should have treated you and your sister with the same respect. But, you know, that kind of raises the question, Kim, you had mentioned your response to this kind of situation, and it sounds like you handled it in a similar fashion. You know, let's just get out of here, basically. But, you know, I think a lot of women would say, well, maybe that's why this is persisting. You know, do we have any different sorts of interests that play into how we respond to discrimination, overt or otherwise? I mean, are we trying to make people happy, or you know, do you feel pressure from any of those other places? Kim?
I think it's all dependent on the situation. You know, if it were a situation where I felt I was threatened in some fashion or my livelihood was threatened, I would respond differently than if it were in a situation where it was an offhand comment or it didn't have a great effect on my life. Like I said, I've been lucky I haven't had to deal with it in an instance where it would affect my livelihood. And so I don't know how I'd react in that moment. I hope I never have to find out.
It's a no-win, I think.
Right.
Because
right.
you can take those opportunities to educate that person if you think that they're capable of
processing
or wanting to be educated. But you also run the risks too of being a hysterical woman,
right.
or being crazy, or you're emotional. And women, if they show emotion in any kind of context like that, then I don't think they're taken as seriously. So I do think that's an area too where I think women maybe have to be a little bit more careful.
Right or wrong.
Right or wrong.
That's the deal.
Right or wrong.
Yeah.
And
here's a caller, Clarissa. I think it's probably for you. You know, from a judiciary standpoint, do you feel like females in your position are viewed or treated differently? I assume the caller means by the parties,
right.
Or I guess even the lawyers. Do you have any insight into that?
I don't feel like I have been treated differently because I'm a woman on the bench by the parties or certainly colleagues or other legal professionals. I'm certain it will happen at some point, but I haven't had that personal experience. My experience is more if I feel that I'm being dismissed or disrespected, I feel it has more to do with the process and that the person coming in doesn't trust the process. They're not comfortable there and they're not going to show respect or professional courtesy regardless of who would be on the bench, even if I were a male. Or at least that's how I choose to view it. Because I haven't been in a situation where I feel that it was my gender. If anything, I think maybe sometimes my age for that role has played a part. Like I can see they're kind of surprised, but I don't think it's my gender. I think maybe it's more age. But I do my best to treat everybody fairly, and so that they can walk out of the courtroom feeling like they've been heard and that it's fair. They might not agree, but at least they've had their opportunity to present their case.
This is a related issue. You know, we've talked a little bit about how to respond to situations where we might feel discriminated against, but are there things that we consider in our day-to-day decision making, our clothes, our tone of voice, the way we approach a situation that you feel might be colored by not necessarily your gender, but this idea that it might be responded to with a gender issue, if that makes sense? Kim?
Well, I don't know that it makes sense, but I do think it's important for women. We have to be more aware of how we will be perceived, whether it's our clothes, our hair, our makeup, our voice. All of those things I think people are more critical of when it comes to women than they are men. And so it really is important to be measured and to be purposeful about the persona that you're putting out there, whether it's in court or in a boardroom or in any situation that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
I do think that applies more to women.
Mm-hmm.
I think that jurors, we were talking back before we started, you know, you have to be very careful with jurors and even co-counsel and other audiences that you might have in any kind of context, because most of the time we don't hear anybody talking about what tie Bob wore, or did you see his shoes, they're brown, and, you know, but you will hear, whether you like it or not, you will hear comments regarding a female attorney's attire, you know, or her shoes, or the way she carried herself, how she looked. And so that is a reality that I think that applies to women more than men. So I just think it's something that women in law have to think about, because it is a lot about presentation.
Well, and again, you know, right or wrong, part of what we're doing is dealing with people, and you know, I think, well, I'm not the panelist, I'm the moderator, so I'm not going to weigh in on this. You know, another topic we talked about briefly was, you know, if there were certain areas of the law or practices in-house versus, you know, public sector versus private sector versus academia. You know, the statistics vary in all these areas. Another caller asked, you know, I'm a young woman interested in becoming an attorney. Would you advise any women going into the law, young or otherwise, as far as, well, you know, if you're interested in this, maybe look at this area, or would you say, go for it, whatever you want to do?
You know, I think it's just like anything else. You might start down a path, and you just expose yourself to as much as possible, as much knowledge, both in academic and life experience, and that includes all kinds of jobs and all kinds of classes, you know, to encourage that experience, because you might have an idea of who you want to be or what you want to do, but different life experiences draw you in different ways, and that could surprise you. And so I would never deter anybody from looking at law. I love it. It's been wonderful. It hasn't necessarily taken the road that I thought it would when I first started, and that's good. That's the way that it should be. So, but I would encourage anybody looking at that to, just like any other career field, take different kinds of legal classes, take different kinds of legal internships, because you would be surprised at what area you might really be drawn to that you wouldn't think you would be. And that's where I find, you know, your happiness, a lot of your time is spent at work and with who you're working with. And so it's pretty important to really have a love for what you're doing, because it makes it so much easier. It's not a job then, it's a career.
The only thing I would add to that is I do think it's very important to get into a law office, whether it's a firm or something in the public sector, to really see what the practice of law is like. That's not something I did, and I don't know that if I had done that, if I would have gone to law school.
Interesting.
But
okay.
I do think really do the research before you commit to the law school experience because it's expensive.
I was going to say, and the loans.
And once you're in, you're kind of, you're in up to your.
We don't have a lot of transferable skills, do we?
That's right, right. So really do the work beforehand to make sure it is something that you can see yourself doing.
Okay.
But the good thing is that you can go to law school and then use that degree for so many different things. You don't have to practice law. It's beneficial in other areas as well.
And we discovered that, and we all did a little research before this show, and we have over 50% of graduating law school classes are female, but again, we go, about half that is, actually practicing. So, okay, last question, and I warned you guys about this question. You both look a little nervous.
Yeah.
Clarissa, would you encourage your daughter to become a lawyer? And it has to be quick because we only have a little bit of time.
Yes, I would, but I would want to make sure she really wants to do it because it is very expensive and it's a huge investment.
Okay. Kim?
I would tell her to figure out if she really wants to do it, to shadow some attorneys, to figure out what the practice is before taking on that investment.
Okay.
Because, yeah, it can be expensive.
Yeah, a little bit. All right, well, thank you very much. That's all the time we have tonight for Lawyers on the Line. Thank you very much to our guests and to all the viewers who called in with questions. I'm Stephanie Balmer. Thank you and good night.